folks, I'm Ruth Freeman, licensed clinical social worker and founder of Peace at Home Parenting. I'm delighted to be here today with my colleagues to talk about a very difficult subject. This is our monthly question and answer session for Peace at Home. We're focusing on the war in Ukraine, but we're really open to any questions you have about parenting in general. I'm going to ask my colleagues to introduce themselves so you know who's here, and then we'll have a little conversation. So Hanna, will you start?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Hanna Brinkhaus. I am a licensed clinical social worker, and I have a private practice here in Storrs, Connecticut.
And I'm Aaron Weintraub. I'm a product person, curriculum director at Peace at Home Parenting. And I also have a private practice in Tolland, and I have 3 children of my own, 7, 11, and 20, who I've been having these conversations with to some degree as well.
All right, that's already happening. So I want to remind you that you can just post your questions. If you're coming to us from Facebook, just put your questions on the Facebook page and we will get to them. Aaron is going to be supporting us by keeping track of any questions. There's no wrong questions. It can be about the conversation we're having, or it can be about something completely different. You have some specialists here. Hanna works with adults and children, but she's especially passionate about what age group would you say, Hanna, do you ideally work with?
Well, the under 5 population, pregnancy under 5 is my main focus, but my practice has opened up to really kind of the gamut. There's so much need out there right now that I think all of us have really just kind of opened our practices and our hearts to supporting families in any way that we can.
And Hanna has worked with children in the whole developmental spectrum, and she really understands child and adolescent development. And Aaron, I would say, has done a lot of work with kids who have special social emotional needs. So if your child has ADHD or autism or struggles with anxiety, Aaron just has a little bit of a magic touch with kids who have those struggles, and he understands them kind of from the inside out, in my experience. Aaron, is there anything else you want to add about who you work with and any specialties that you have?
No, thank you, Ruth. That was a very generous introduction. But I just want to encourage folks who are watching this live on Facebook to send your questions in. We have our fantastic tech support, Amy, will be on relaying your questions. And we also have a viewer on Zoom. And I just wanted to let you know, please, that you can send your chats and questions the way you normally would, and they will not be visible to our Facebook Live audience. Thank you.
They'll be private. Great. So thank you all for being here. My granddaughter asked me, she's 5, and she asked me what war was. And I gave a really abysmal answer. And I would love to hear from you, Hanna, and you, Aaron, if you have any thoughts about this. I mean, I said it's when groups of people disagree and then they become physical about the disagreement. I was trying to be concrete, but I have so many feelings and thoughts about war in general, and certainly about this war, which is highlighting some interesting issues for me personally and for our culture. But Hanna and Aaron, do you have any ideas about how to even just talk about that word with kids of different ages?
My thought is a simple one. I'd love to hear Hanna's view on it, but I found that sometimes it's easier to talk about what war does rather than what war is. So war as a verb, and that helps get to, I think, the roots about children's anxiety. It also points to some things that you can do. You can't prevent war. You can't stop the war, but when you start to talk about the effects and how it hurts people, then there are concrete things like donating money, raising awareness, collecting and sending supplies that can give you something concrete to do, which is what we all look for when we're in crisis.
So that, I mean, that speaks to Aaron's experience of working with anxious kids, because if you feel anxious, taking action often can be calming. It can be helpful. So I appreciate that observation.
And also being an anxious person, and that helps as a parent too, I think, because we're all, it's easy to talk about. It's easier sometimes to talk about our children's anxiety around this, but I think that I'm sure that we're all in this soup together.
And I love that idea of really focusing on what we can do rather than what we can't do, what we do have control over versus what we don't have control over. And sometimes with all children, but I think definitely like the under 10 population, that framing it that it's a grown-up issue, and grown-ups get worried and anxious about it. And these are the ways that we cope, but trying to help them understand that it's not something that's theirs. And sometimes that can help, and sometimes it make it feel even more out of control. But from my experience, children understanding that this is a grown-up thing, but these are the ways that you can, like Aaron talked about, the way we as a family can try to help it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think one thing that has been said often, but is worth repeating, is that children look to us for how to interpret the world. And so how we're doing is a key factor in our children's well-being. So for some of us, this brings up our history. I'm Jewish, and we lost family in World War II, and that trauma comes down through generations, both through environment and also through the effect on our cells. I'm learning that trauma literally affects our cellular structure, which I'm not surprised to learn. So the first thing, it's like, put your oxygen mask on in the airplane. The first thing is for us as parents to look at, how am I feeling about this, and processing our feelings about it, talking about it with other grownups, talking about it with trusted people, and using whatever tools we have to calm our brains before we interact with the kids, or as we're interacting with the kids. That's probably the number one practice I would say is important, because sometimes I get so into calming a kid down that I get anxious. That's not going to be helpful. So one thing I read about was, for like school age kids, was to go to a map, like find a map and make it concrete. This is where the Ukraine is. This is where Russia is, and kind of just talk about the logistics of all of this. Do you all have any thoughts about that, of other ways of kind of the teaching pieces of this, or putting it in a historical context? Or
I've still been thinking about what it means and how it relates to this, but one of the things that I heard somebody say that was really meaningful to me about this was, in an emergency, the first principle is not to create more victims. And so I think that for me, being able to, the easy or tempting things to do is to talk about bad people, or to kind of make the Russia or the Ukraine, whomever, the other, but to be able to focus on people as people, and just like if this were an interpersonal conflict, separate out a government's actions from the people, and in that regard, we can look at both sides as suffering, as going through losses, as having needs, as having these human emotions that our children can learn from in this situation. So I'm sorry, Ruth, I don't know if that really answered your question.
It's an important distinction. I think that's very helpful. I mean, our goal is to raise peacemakers. And I think that by making some people bad, that's not going to strengthen kids as peacemakers. So I think for me, that's a very important issue. And, I think about children coping with their own anger and how they handle their anger, and trying to go from the personal to the political, and how all that works. I think it's very helpful.
And I love the intersection of what the two of you have said, that Ruth, to put it on a map and say, so we live in the US and this is where this is happening. And in those places where other people live are families, or is a government that maybe not everyone agrees with, that's taking actions that might be harming them, but that's not each of those families, each of those people, each of those communities. And I think that's very, at least speaking personally, that's not what I was raised with. It really was like the government and the people were sort of one. And I know it's not perfect, but I do feel like we generationally are trying to shift that and say that these are government decisions. And again, we wouldn't use this language with younger children, but with older children, to really think about the structure of separating government and government leaders' decisions from the people that live in those homes and those communities. And being able to kind of work from that place of understanding how the intersection between that place, those people, and what it means to have a conflict happening.
And I think it was, Fred Rogers maybe was the person who gave the advice of, in a terrible situation, look to the helpers. Those are the people who are going to emerge. And you can look to the helpers as a way of sidestepping some of the larger geopolitical nuances of trying to understand history as it happens. But those helpers are there when we look for them. We have a question from Facebook. And the question is, would you approach this any differently if family were located in a neighboring country? So I think I'm hearing, I'm not 100% sure, please clarify if I didn't hear this correctly, but it looks like the person who's asking maybe has a personal connection, or their family is at real risk for harm in this situation. And I wonder if you two have any comments on whether that changes the dynamic of how you'd respond or talk to children about this.
Well, I mean, first of all, over 1 million Ukrainians live in the United States. So this is happening for many families in the United States. And either you actually live closer or you have family there, it's close, it's very close. And I think that there's a couple of things. I mean, one is we have to own our feelings in a way that's manageable for the kids. So we have to be congruent. Congruent means looking on the outside how you feel on the inside. Because if you're really scared for your brother who lives in the Ukraine and you say everything's okay, children pick up on the difference between your words and how you're feeling inside, and they will make up a story about it. And kids are great perceivers and terrible interpreters. So, and they usually interpret things to be about them. So if you're giving a mixed message, they're going to make up a story about why your face looks funny. And it's going to be that there's something wrong with them. So typically you want to be as congruent as possible, but in a manageable amount. So you tell the truth. If you have a brother living in the Ukraine, you can say, I was able to hear from him 2 days ago. I haven't heard from him today. I get scared inside. So we're giving some truth. But you're not dumping the entire experience onto the kid because they can't really manage all your feelings. But you give it to them in a way that matches their developmental stage. And I mean, one thing that I've heard that was useful was asking kids what they have heard. So saying, so what have you heard about this war? And also with teenagers, sometimes asking what their friends are saying or what their friends are feeling is a slightly less invasive way to see what they're thinking and feeling. So sometimes they'll say, one of my friends has been thinking about harming themselves. They get really freaked out and they think about cutting themselves. Oh, so if you have a kid talking about this, about their friends, then you want to pay attention with your child, because they're going to be reporting some things that their peers are doing, and they're thinking about themselves as well. But talk about their friends first. What are your friends saying about it? What are they feeling about it? How about you? What's your perspective on this? But it'll ease the conversation. It might be more candid than what an adolescent might tell you about themselves. Any other thoughts about if you were in a neighboring country, specifically, how might you be handling this?
Well, I just, it brings up a question of I think not to, I don't want to abstract this because that's a, this, I assume this person who's asked this has a relative who's in, real danger, and I don't want to gloss past that. But there's also an aspect of helping children understand about trusted information sources as well. My son has said that he's, seen things on YouTube or places that aren't, scary or inappropriate, but we both know that, when we all know that, like, both sides are putting out information to influence opinion. And so to be able to talk about where we get our information from and how to process that and verify it, and how much information is healthy to consume. Those are important questions around this as well, that I think are the same, but just really amplified if you have a relative at immediate risk.
One thing I was going to add was that I think an important message is that it's my job to keep you safe, and I'm going to take care of that job. And even if you're not 100% confident, I mean, even if you feel scared, I mean, literally, if you're in a neighboring country, you're scared. But for the well-being of the child, you really want to be clear. It's my job to keep you safe. I'm going to take care of that. And these are some ways I'm going to keep you safe. We're going to not go to this place because there might be a little risk with that. There's people at your school who are doing this to make sure you're safe. So you be pretty concrete. And of course it depends on the age of the child. But Hanna, you were going to say something.
I think just the idea of being able to say to children, so what have you been hearing? So what do you want? What brought you? So I'm wondering why you're wondering that, and being genuinely open-heartedly listening, because sometimes what we think they might be thinking or worried about or wondering about, we might be completely off base. So that ability to ask that question and to then listen, really sit with the answer, and maybe not have anything to respond other than thank you. Thank you for letting me know. Thank you for letting me know that what you've been hearing. Thank you for letting me know what you're wondering about.
And I think, Aaron talked about a particular lens, the media lens, and there's like 3 lenses we can look at this from. One is the media lens. It's a learning opportunity. There's a wonderful resource called Common Sense Media. And it really helps parents review different sorts of media and evaluate them. And it helps parents teach kids about what's trustworthy and what isn't. It's a great resource right now. So looking at it, helping kids analyze the media lens, like where's the information I can trust? What's the difference between people doing comments about this and people sharing information? How does that work? How can I discern all that? There's also the academic or historical lens. How does this experience fit into the history of the world, the history of our country, the history of Ukraine? So it's just kind of talking about history and thinking about those ideas. And then there's the personal lens, where our family has had this experience. When my family was in Poland, this is what happened, and my cousin had to do this. So personalizing it and looking at all that. And I just want to add that I often tell the story of the 9/11 research, where they found that kids who knew the story of their ancestors, especially their ancestors overcoming adversity. So my grandmother leaving Poland, my grandfather leaving first and working in the United States and sending my grandmother money so she could come to the United States, overcoming adversity, knowing the story of their ancestors, was a protective factor for kids after 9/11. They were less anxious, less fearful, because they kind of had roots, and they had a context for struggle and overcoming struggle. Any other thoughts about any of that, Aaron?
Well, something that I wanted to bring up, I think we've done a really good job of addressing some of the higher level conversations and how to address them. But I think something for younger children is that they process new experiences and information and worries as through play, and there's a tendency to be concerned about violent play when we see it in our children. But I remember I was teaching preschool prior to 9/11, and we had this rule no using sticks as guns, no pointing your finger, like really zero tolerance. We had this idea that we were going to create this peaceful world through play, which I think I'm still proud of that. But children now have lived in a world that was 2000, and since then they've lived in a world that's been under constant war, for our own country included. And so recognizing that, allowing and engaging with play schemas to help them integrate this is important to them being able to understand and process and eventually be able to have these conversations that you all just described so beautifully.
Any other thoughts about that, Hannah? I know that play is such a...
I think that idea of this is going to sound bizarre, but like normalizing it, not normalizing war, because it's just a concept that I think even as adults we can't organize, but that honoring that children have a way of working it out in a way that isn't always verbal, isn't always through direct relationships, but can be through their play, and allowing them to work out the things, work out their worries, work out their solutions. Maybe they've got some ideas of how this should work out. And allowing that to be normalized within families or school systems, to realize that they have these big themes they don't know what to do with, and kids are great about working it out through their bodies versus through language.
And by work it out, what we mean is that they get some management over it so they can carry on with their lives. Working it out means thinking about it, processing it, and being able to come back into the present. So children are in the present. I mean, that changes once they reach adolescence, I would say, and somewhat during school years, but for the most part, they're in the present. And children are also naturally narcissistic. So meaning that their brains aren't set up to put themselves in someone else's place. Some kids have the ability to do that a little bit, and it gets better in adolescence, but really adolescence is the most narcissistic developmental stage. They're focusing on their internal lives. And so you may be struck with their disinterest in this. And they're worried that you're not having pizza for dinner when people are dying in Ukraine. But that is natural for children. That's how their brains are built. They're in this moment. And don't fret that they're not compassionate or caring. It's a natural expression of their developmental stage. And another way that kids work things out well is in drawing. And you might see some drawings that are really upsetting. And again, as Hannah mentioned, you want to be curious. You don't want to say, don't draw someone, drawing blood with a knife. That's terrible. What you want to be is curious. Wow, what's that story about? I wonder why you're thinking about that. Tell me more about that. Help me understand that. That's our job, is to receive their experiences and help them organize them rather than manage their behavior. And I think this is a general principle. We're working on a lot of materials for parents about mental health, and we are helping parents to understand that when children get dysregulated, which is psychobabble for extremely upset, either internally upset or acting out, or things that you look at your child and go, ugh, I don't like that behavior. Often that needs help. They're not acting out, they're reaching out, or we say they're not giving you a hard time, they're having a hard time. So I think particularly during these times when we are surrounded by all of this disruption and change. I just was talking to a mother today, and she was from a company that was talking to us about peace and home parenting. And she got a phone call from the nurse during the meeting, and she had to go pick up her child, and she felt guilty because she was coughing in the morning, and she sent her to school, and she burst into tears. And it was so powerful to see how parents are struggling right now with the multiple demands on us. And kids used to go to school with coughs all the time, but now if a kid has a cough in school, it's a major thing, and they have to come home, and we have to feel like we made a mistake. And the pressures on parents right now are tremendous. And so I just want to say to you, if you're acting out, or if your kid is acting out, it's really about reaching out for help And I hope you can see that within yourself and within your kids as we're thinking about these big ideas. Any last thoughts, Hanna or Aaron, as we wrap up today?
I think returning to that place over and over again, that self-care, when you're able to regulate yourself and you're able to center yourself and get real with your own feelings and thoughts and expressions of what's going on in your life, that is a gift to your children. When you've allowed that for yourself, then you're more able to give that to your kids, be it explaining war or just getting kids out in the morning to get on the bus. I think that, we can't say that enough with the work that we do with families.
Aaron, any last thoughts?
Yeah, just for me is I taught a workshop earlier this week on anxious children, and one of the things that kept popping up from parents was physical manifestations of anxiety, washing their hands all the time, got stomach aches, they won't go out and try things because they say they're tired or have a headache. And so, just to, be aware of the power of giving unnamed things names, wording things. I don't know if that's a real phrase, but, to rather than you don't have a stomach ache, or maybe you should just try going to the bathroom and then we'll leave, recognizing that some of these symptoms of anxiety may appear in the body before they're able to be articulated, and that it's a real gift to be able to help children to recognize those signs, and then that's the beginning of being able to process and integrate that and deal with it in a healthy way.
And I think I just want to add to that, because that's a very powerful observation. And I want to hear from you too, because I'm not going to get this quite right. But I think that, we call it reflective listening, but saying, oh, maybe you feel a little bit uncomfortable about going to that birthday party. Maybe your tummy ache means you feel a little uncomfortable about going to that birthday party. We want to word things, but we have to be careful about becoming their shrinks and saying, oh, you're just anxious, it'll be okay. Because that's really intrusive. But at the same time, we want to reflect their emotions, but in a gentle, tentative way.
Ruth, the word you've used a few times is curiosity, that I keep hearing you say, approaching, and I think Hanna, you said it too, approaching things with curiosity. And I love that word because it's different than a neutral asking a question. It's different than an aggressive kind of inquiry or interrogation, but curiosity has all of those, that full spectrum of gentleness, of love, of generosity, of like openness and acceptance. That's right. So I think that word of curiosity is one that I try to remind myself or hold when it comes to these moments.
So specifically, curiosity might be something like, I wonder if you're feeling a little concerned about going. Maybe you're feeling, how else do you express that curiosity, Hanna?
You took my favorite word, wondering. I always feel like that's a kind of neutral ground with most age groups. And, I'm wondering about XYZ, and then bring it back.
Yeah. And sometimes, I experience with my granddaughter, she'll push back. No, I'm not worried. And that's the part where you really have to be accepting and say, oh, all right, we'll figure it out, or let me know if you change your mind, and really, when they correct us, we have to accept that correction. We can't have a debate with them about what they're feeling. And I think it just gives them permission to have feelings, and we're letting them know feelings are okay. And maybe we didn't hit it on the target, but I think these ways of listening, this sort of active way of listening that express acceptance and curiosity is really important right now. And it's important to us too, hoping that you as a parent can listen to yourself with curiosity and listen, what am I telling myself about this right now? And is this really useful to me right now? and really ramping up the self-compassion. I have to say, in the hundreds of parents we've been talking to in the past few weeks, If I could wave a magic wand, the one thing I would want for parents right now is to increase their self-compassion, to listen to ourselves with acceptance and care, all the stuff we're trying to inspire you to do with kids. I hope that parents can move towards that self-kindness and being curious about what I'm telling myself right now and what's going to be helpful to me right now, as opposed to beating ourselves up about how imperfect we are. I was just talking to somebody about the rise of perfectionism, and that's a whole topic coming up in our classes right now. So I want to thank Aaron and Hanna. Any last things before we go? Observations?
I just want, we got a comment from Facebook of appreciation. Thank you so much for setting up this event, super helpful. And I want to thank all of the folks who watched this live, and to speak to people who will be seeing this as it lives on as a recording on Facebook, to invite you to send your questions in through Facebook or solutions@peaceathomeparenting.com. This is an important topic that we organized this because of what we were hearing from parents and workplaces about this as a need. And so we want to be there for you as you're there for your children. So please reach out for any support that you need, and we're here.
Perfect. So we love to hear from you. Solutions@peaceathomeparenting.com. Hanna, any last observations?
I think just grateful that we have a community that we can meet here together, even virtually, to support each other, offer support and guidance for our parents, and for our parents to offer each other.
Thank you so much. It's been great. And I appreciate Hanna and Aaron for jumping on this today. And we'll see you again. Email us at solutions@peaceathomeparenting.com. We very much want to hear from you. Thanks, everybody.